Gun murders have climbed sharply in recent years. According to the Pew Research Center in 2022, the 45,222 total gun deaths in 2020 were by far the most on record, representing a 14% increase from the year before, a 25% increase from 5 years earlier. Even with this many people dying, gun companies in the US are exempt from any civil liability. The fact remains that gun deaths in the United States are far higher than in any other first world developed country. The gun industry should be better regulated and held accountable for its complicity in the deaths caused by guns. In this speech, I will tell you about how the outdated and non-existent laws in place regarding firearm safety. I will then examine how gun manufacturers cannot be held legally accountable, and finally, I will discuss what can be done to make guns safer for everyone. I will begin by explaining firearm regulation. Firearms are not regulated for safety, and the laws in place are outdated. One statistic activists have pointed to is that gun deaths are higher than vehicle deaths. A 2021 report published by UC Davis Violence Prevention Research Program found that in 2019, deaths as a result of firearms exceeded those of motor vehicles. For decades, cars were far deadlier than firearms, but today, less people die as a result of cars than guns. This is largely due to the safety regulations around motor vehicles today. Vehicles have seatbelts, airbags, roll cages, and crumple zones, all aimed at improving the safety of vehicles, and they are effective. Guns have no such regulations. Guns are the only consumer good not subject to federal health and safety regulation. According to the Violence Policy Center in 2021, thanks to the political clout of the gun lobby, firearms are escaped safety regulation in the 1970s when the US Congress created the major project safety agencies. The unique exemption has allowed gun makers to innovate for lethality rather than safety. As a result, today's gun industry thrives on developing, manufacturing, and marketing highly militarized firearms, including high-capacity pistols, assault weapons, and 50 caliber sniper rifles. These highly lethal weapons have been developed as a means to do one job, so it comes to us as no surprise that guns are responsible for so many deaths. You may now be wondering, well, even if there isn't any regulation, why don't people just sue the manufacturers directly? Well, gun manufacturers can actually skirt the law as they have legal immunity in most, if not all, instances. According to the Associated Press in 2022, the 2005 Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or PLCAA, gives immunity to gun makers so they can't be held liable for injuries caused by criminal misuse of firearms. They went on to say this law is in place because even with PLCAA exceptions, it is still very difficult to sue gun manufacturers. Of the 6 exceptions, Charles said at least 3 are hardly ever used, while the others have been applied fairly narrowly, and judges have dismissed many cases against gun makers. Although there are several means for which they can be sued, these means are seldom used, and when used, the courts tend not to allow these cases through. Even when it comes to selling weapons used in war crimes, U.S. companies are not held accountable. AmnestyInternational.org in 2019 said, in Yemen, Amnesty researchers analyzed weapon remnants from the scene of a 2017 airstrike by Saudi Arabia UAE-led coalition forces in Sana'a, in which 16 civilians were killed, and they found that they had been manufactured by U.S. defense giant Raytheon. Another Amnesty investigation found that U.S. company Lockheed Martin made the bomb used at an airstrike which killed 3 members of one family in their home in Yemen in January of 2018. These are not isolated incidents. Companies have been known to sell weapons to countries known for committing war crimes, and when asked why they willingly did so, they all came back with the same blanket response. They say the military and security equipment is subject to government review, which includes consideration of international human rights and international law. Put simply, manufacturers and arms dealers are untouchable by legal action due to government protections. I have gone over the lack of regulation on firearms and protections gun manufacturers and arms dealers have, but you may now be asking, what changes can be made? Well, here are some proposed restrictions and regulations that could be enacted to eliminate the prevalence and danger of firearms. The Biden administration has already put in place some short-term changes. These include the regulation and elimination of ghost guns. Ghost guns are unserialized guns which cannot be traced by the U.S. government, making tracking crimes harder. Without knowing the owner of a firearm, law enforcement cannot track weapons to the perpetrators of the crime. The White House also proposes Congress do its part in enacting gun reform. According to a recent White House debriefing, Congress needs to do its job by passing the budget and other essential legislation to reduce gun crime, including legislation to require background checks for all gun sales, ensure that no terrorist can buy a weapon in the United States, ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and repeal gun manufacturers' protections from liability. Firstly, background checks would ensure criminals wouldn't have access to weapons. Second, banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines would go a long way to lower deaths as a result of mass shootings. Reloading simply doesn't allow many bullets to be fired, to be frank, and this would go a long way to improve safety. Finally, repealing manufacturers' protections would enable citizens to address serious issues caused by the weapons they produce and the individuals they sell those weapons to. Additionally, simple laws regarding guns be kept in safes can go a long way to reducing child suicide. According to the Washington Post, in March 2018, in Massachusetts, which has the strictest safe, strong storage laws in the country, guns are used in just 9% of youth suicides, compared to 42% nationally. The suicide death rate among youth in the state is 38% below the national average. Considering suicide is responsible for the largest cause of gun deaths, actions like this could go towards making us for a safer world for everyone. With the gun industry better regulated and held accountable, its complicity in the deaths caused by guns, less people have to die needless deaths. I told you about the lack of gun regulation, went into the inability for us to pursue any civil liability against gun manufacturers, and finally, I discussed the real actions that could be taken to improve gun regulation and safety. As a final charge, I encourage you to elect officials who sponsor legislation such as these examples, and to encourage your elected officials to pass such legislation. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you listening to my speech.